An opportunity, I guess, or I thought about doing it as a quiz, but that wouldn't be quite fair. Can any of you see what is in front of me here that I've got stretched across the desk?
Is it a parachute?
Is it a tree?
Some sort of orange bag thing.
Yeah, the orange bag thing is part of it. It's part of it. Here is a portion of it. I don't know whether you can see it or not.
Just like
Yes.
And then a
It looks like tassel.
long tail of a thing.
I'm telling you, it's parachute.
It's a kite.
Parachute.
I'm guessing weather balloon, but
Oh, is it?
Oh, where the
Is it a weather balloon?
Hot air rising?
yeah, you set the big mass of string on fire and then it heats up the air and then the thing floats. Then the other string is hopefully not going to catch fire so you can pull it back down. It ain't a weather balloon.
Tom is correct. It is a weather balloon.
Or
This device was hung by the long cord. The actual weather balloon portion of it has been adversely affected by the trip. It's in strings and strips, and this, is a weather balloon that was sent up by the NOAA, National Weather Service, and I do not know from where. I found it last Friday, right near my home, and the initial instruction was to return this part that I've got in my hand. It was tied had a zip tie underneath this little portion here, and then it was tied with that cotton string underneath the balloon portion, and somebody was correct when they guessed a parachute for that orange component there. But it came down right close to the house, and they request that if anyone finds the thing, that the bottom portion of it be returned in an envelope, which I have here. And I'm going to mail it away today. But I thought, since we're talking about climate and weather, that it would be a real good thing to bring to class and talk about for a few minutes.
I like how they put it's not dangerous on the side of it.
Do what, Tyler?
I said I like how they put in explicit words, it's not dangerous.
Oh, it's not dangerous. No, it's nothing to it. And I have no idea what's involved in this styrofoam device, but there are two sensing elements and possibly a transmitter of some sort. I don't know. It's real light.
It's a UFO.
No, it's a weather balloon. But as we talk about differences in temperature and so forth, this is a mechanism that the Weather Service uses to determine differences in temperature at varying altitudes, and it will determine also wind currents based on where it was released and where it was found. So, I have a question. All right.
I'm seeing a similar device like this set up, maybe you've seen it, it's on 57 out towards Chatham. It's sitting up on a hill. It looks like that, except it's in the shape of I'd say it's at least a 6 or 7 foot long cone that's up on a pole on a hillside.
I have no idea, Tyler. I've never seen it. I don't know what it is. There's some of those that are associated with cell towers, but I have no idea what's out there. I have no idea. And as I came to work yesterday morning, we had some what I would call ground fog, but it did give a realistic example of what we call a temperature inversion. If any of you happen to have noticed that, the fog would move up and then it would level off. So a device like this would be an indicator for the Weather Service of the differences in temperatures that occur at different levels. So just thought it was a unique opportunity to show you this. I've seen or heard of weather balloons most of my days, but this is the first time I've ever had any direct contact with one. So, the balloon portion of it, part of it is a pretty thick type of latex, but a lot of the remainder portion of it is really thin, and it smells. It has that latex rubber aroma. After I handle it, it's on my hands, and it stays with me for a while.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And Tom, had you ever seen one of these before?
No, I was just, looking at it, sort of taking a guess, knowing that you've been talking weather and climate stuff here lately, but no. That was just a lucky guess on my part.
Well,
I mean, I looked at it, it kind of made sense to me, so.
yeah, that was a good shot, but it's I thought it would at least give us an idea of one of the things that people use or the Weather Service uses to evaluate and determine some of their weather forecasts. All right, as we think about weather, have any of you caught wind of an upcoming weather event?
A hurricane.
Not yet a hurricane.
It's going to be.
They say it will be.
It is going to come right up.
It was just categorized as a tropical storm a couple hours ago.
And it's going to come right up to us.
You think?
That's what the current model shows.
Okay. You believe it?
It may veer off somewhat.
Yeah, it may veer off. So what's that going to do?
It's going to bring a lot of rain.
Okay. How many days have it been since we had rain?
Not very long.
2 weeks.
Yeah, you're quite correct. The forecasters that I've listened to this morning and last night were saying it'd been 19 days since we've had any measurable rain. So, with that being that long since we had any rain, and assume we get 3 inches, what's that going to do?
Because a lot of temperature change.
No. Well, it may be some temperature change because of the cloud cover. And potentially tropical air, it may be a little bit warmer. But the point I was getting at, we've been dry for 3 weeks. Then we catch 3 inches of rain where we got 2 extremes again. So that's how you get the average. And that's the way it seems to me that our weather has gone over the past number of years. We have extremes. Extremely hot, extremely cold, then the average looks the same. It's been real hot, been dry and then wet, come together, you got the average again. So, we're just dealing with variations in weather, and that's normal. And as we talk about weather effects on plants, if we had experienced this 19 days in the early part of the growing season, it would have had a detrimental effect on plant populations and germination and the initial growth of plants. But coming at this part of the season, most of the crops have had adequate moisture through the summer, and it's come at a time when they're beginning to mature, so it's not going to be a major detriment to our crop production. Most of the corn is got a full ear and it's made. Most of the soybeans, I think, there may be some late soybeans that would have been stressed by this, but as general, it's been a pretty decent growing season from our aspect. What about in your area, south side? How's the growing season been?
It kind of turned off dry on us and stunted a lot of things. The corn that was planted early did all right, but
Okay.
planted late here didn't do well.
Okay.
Tobacco,
And that's,
short this.
go ahead.
The tobacco and corn seems to be kind of short here. They just didn't grow up.
Okay. Well, and that's part of what I was getting at. I didn't realize you'd been that dry that long. Most of the crops in our area have done reasonably well, but June and the early part of July were extremely wet for us. And we get reductions in moisture towards the 1st of August. From a personal standpoint, it's been a most ideal growing season for the grapes. We had to fight diseases during that wet, warm period in late May, June, and early July because of the conditions that existed, which were suitable for the disease incidents. But once we hit mid-August, it's gotten dry and allowed us to save the crop that we were able to grow. So we're going to finish up harvesting grapes on Saturday, just in front of this. Tyler's predicted 3 inches of rain. So we'll be blessed in that area.
What's about the time that you would normally harvest soybeans?
It varies, Tyler, with the date which they were planted, and they're different groups of beans. In other words, different elements of maturity. Normally, soybeans have to stay in the field until they drop their leaves and the bean dries. It's picked based on the amount of moisture that's in the bean, and generally they want that moisture to be, and I'm not sure this, that's somewhere in the range of 11 or 12% or less.
So if a field of them is starting to turn yellow, are they getting near harvest time?
No, they're gonna have to wait until they, all that leaf surface that you see, that's senescence. That's a term that we use to refer to the beginning of the aging of it. Those soybean leaves are beginning to senesce. In other words, give up, and they're gonna yellow, and then they're gonna drop off. I saw a field Tuesday that 99% of the leaves had already dropped. You just saw the stems and the beans. But that was an early planted variety, an early short season variety. And those beans will more than likely be ready to harvest, I'm guessing, plus or minus Thanksgiving, depending upon the weather. The field that you saw may not be dry enough until we get on towards Christmas. It takes a while for the moisture to be pulled out of those beans. And the reason for that, if they harvest a wet bean, they'll begin to mold and rot. So they don't want to do that.
They want a dry bean.
They want a dry bean. They want low moisture content.
Okay.
Same thing for corn, field corn. You want it to be, have low moisture because of being able to save it. You want it to be dry enough that you can put it away and not have it mold or begin to rot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was just wondering.
Moisture's a key in those things.
All right. I was just wondering because I've been watching the progress of that field right across the road from me for a while now.
Yeah. I've noticed some. Matter of fact, there's some on the farm at home that are yellowing, and then there's a field behind my house that are still vibrant green. But there's 2 different varieties, and I know this. So there'll be two different harvest dates on those, more than likely. As we talk about temperature, we mentioned this a little bit the other day. Temperature in rural environments is quite different than urban situations because the buildings and the pavement and things absorb a lot of solar radiation, and they hold it over an extended amount of time. Where rural areas, the land will heat up a little bit, but it'll give off the heat much more readily than what your urban situations are going to be. So there's a dome of warm air that exists over most of the urban areas that we have, and some of them call that an urban heat island or a dome. And it generally will account for 2 to 3, maybe even greater increase in temperature compared to a rural countryside situation. Temperature categorized as the most important factor in plant growth. It determines what will grow where and when it will grow. And some of us as producers try to manipulate, I guess would be a decent term, Mother Nature, by increasing our growing seasons. There's been quite a movement in the last 4 or 5 years from some of the folks with USDA. They provided grants to some producers to put in what's called a hoop house, which a hoop house is a greenhouse that is not heated. It doesn't have ends in it, but it's a dome type area. It's a greenhouse, but it just hasn't been finished. And their intention was not to increase the use of electricity and so forth, but they wanted to create an opportunity for small farmers to increase their potential net income by growing a different crop in another season. So
That sounds like a biodome, and like,
I don't know what you're calling a biodome. I'm not talking about an enclosed area, but it's just a hoop house. It's a greenhouse without the ends in it. And sometimes people will plant greens or beans or tomatoes or cucumbers in it, and be able to harvest a crop 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the normal harvest season of a crop that's planted outside. I have had some exchanges with a lady that was planting flowers. She was doing a different types of flowers that she was cutting and running through flower arrangements at a farmer's market. And I thought that was sort of a unique thing. It would be a high-valued crop if you handled it properly. I've known of folks that were trying to grow berries, raspberries and blackberries in there, and I didn't think that was a very good use of the space. A lot of folks will grow tomatoes. Some will grow cucumbers. Generally, they're planted in the soil that is underneath the hoop house, although they can do raised beds or different types of soil applications to do that. But, generally when we talk about, crops grown outside, a annual crop is one that will grow during a given season, produce seeds or fruit, and then die. And the way we preserve annual crops is we'll plant seeds year after year. Now, if we have perennial crops, generally they're more woody, and they'll be like my grapes or blackberries or blueberries would be a perennial crop. Apples and peaches would be perennial because you've got a woody structure. And in that situation, those crops will generally go dormant during our colder season and then begin to rejuvenate as spring comes on. So that's a different thing that we talk about. There are extremes in nature, in temperature, can have adverse effects on our perennial crops, but it generally doesn't affect annuals that way because usually you wait until after the frost-free date to plant those. So as we talk about different types of plant production and so forth, the USDA has generated what's called a plant hardiness zone map, and it has different regions of the country broken out into different bands based on the temperatures that occur. It generally will also include the length of the growing season. And that's something we probably ought to discuss briefly. What is the growing season? Define the growing season for me.
The growing season?
Mm-hmm. You all know what it is, but it's hard to define unless you really sit and think about it. So I'm asking you to give me a definition of growing season.
the optimum time of the year in which you plant.
It's not a different, that won't, no.
The period
It's true.
The
Go ahead.
season is for a specific plant, like you're talking about soybeans, the period of time when they grow throughout the year.
you're swinging at it, but I'm talking about just in general terms, what is the length of the growing season?
What is the length of the growing season?
Mm-hmm.
You
And
said
it's not the same every year. It's general range, but it's not going to be the same thing, same every year because of two variables.
Temperature, the temperature is the one variable. Wouldn't temperature be the one variable?
Temperature is the variable on both, of both.
What would the second one be?
Temperature?
Rain?
No, temperature. Temperature is a variable on both ends. All right, let me explain it to you. The length of the growing season is from the day of your last frost in the spring until the day of your first frost in the fall.
so from first.
And that's why I say they're variables, because that's never the same thing in a given year.
My error.
Growing season period? Growing,
The growing season is going to be the period of time from the last frost in the spring, and that varies with season to season, until the first frost in the fall. And where we reside, where I'm sitting right now, that's generally about 170 to 180 days. Now, where you are in Southside, I would think it would be possibly 8 to 10 days longer. And if we're talking about the folks down in Southwest, they're probably going to be 20 days shorter than what we are here at Patrick Henry. Because their last frost in the spring is going to be usually the first week of May. And then their first frost in the fall may have already occurred. It may be. So they've got a shorter time period than what we do here. I was talking to a gentleman Tuesday, and he told me he had frost at his farm, which was on a hillside behind Ferrum College, and he said he had enough frost to nip the tender growing points on his tomatoes. Had 2 mornings last week. So, but that's the growing season. It's a term. It's something that we talk about a lot, but it's one of these things that if you don't sit down and think about it, you don't define it. You know what it is, but you can't define it. So that's the accepted definition of growing season for a given area, and it's going to vary quite a bit. And that's why we're talking about this hardiness map that's in it's in your book. Let's see if it gives the exact figure. No, it doesn't show. But it's got the whole country divided into actually 11 zones. The southern portion of Texas and most of Florida are what we call Zone 9. In other words, their low temperature in Zone 9 and a historic minimum is generally between 20 and 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, we are in Zone 7 according to this map, and generally our minimum temperatures are between 0 and 10 degrees. And what this, and then if we look up, say, across the northern part of the Midwest, they are in what we call Zone 3, and they are anywhere from minus 30 to minus 40 degrees. So these different zones are an indicator in the temperature regimes, and that has a major factor on the plants that will grow and survive on an annual basis in those areas. It's not a great concern for me, for my grapes or my apples that we used to grow, or peaches. Not a big concern for Southside, where you're growing tobacco, corn, cotton and things of that type. But from a horticultural standpoint, if you're a landscaper or a landscape designer, quite often you like to create unique landscapes for commercial buildings or for high-end homes or resort situations. And you'll be thumbing through and you'll find a plant that looks, really neat. It would fit the particular situation that you've got. It turns out to be a banana tree. It would fit beautifully. And you think, well, I'll put that, it happens to fit on the north side of a building or building that's facing to the north. And you think it would be a wonderful thing to add to this landscape. And you overlook the fact that that's only suited to zone 9, and you spend, $300 to put a banana tree in South Boston. But that banana tree is not going to survive. So that's the reason that we use this USDA zone map. It will tell you, because if you go through a catalog and look it up, banana trees, it says it's adapted to zone 9 and the lower portion of zone 8. You'll know that that's where that tree will survive, and it won't survive in zone 7 or the upper edge of zone 6. So, this map is useful for folks that are dealing in horticultural crops, particularly in landscape things, because, but for agronomic crops, not a big deal. Now I say that, and in the last few years, there's been an apple variety called Honeycrisp. Have any of you ever tried a Honeycrisp? Do you like Honeycrisp?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What was that, Tyler?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Well, it's a variety that's become popular in the last 2 or 3 years. Today, if I buy a 40-pound box of Honeycrisp apples that are grown in Washington State, that's the pristine, the most highly prized grade of Honeycrisp, they cost me $54 a box for a 40-pound box. So you're looking at basically $1.50 a pound at a wholesale rate. Honeycrisp is a variety that was developed in Minnesota, and it requires a unique set of environmental conditions to thrive. I've had an interaction with a gentleman that had a retirement home at 3,200 feet up on the mountain, and he had a master's degree from University of Tennessee, UT, that he thought he could grow Honeycrisp there. Because of the elevation, it would be a colder environment. But Honeycrisp don't do well there. There are a few of them that are being grown in our area, but it's not suited here because of the differences in the climatological location where that was initially grown. So, that's just an example of things. Thinking about peaches. There are a lot of peach varieties that will grow in southern Georgia and northern part of Florida that will not survive here because they are accustomed to warm winters and warm spring, early spring, and that peach will, and there's a lot of other details that I won't get into today about that adaptability. It refers to chilling requirements and growing degree days and so forth, and that gets a little complicated. I won't do that today. What I'm getting at, this zone map is a guide for anyone that's interested in plant production. And if you're going to landscape your home or a building or something, make sure that the plant selections that you make are suited to be in the geographical region which you're working.
How many plants exactly are in that little guide there?
How many what?
How many plants are listed in that guide?
How many plants? Not a one. This is just a map.
No.
It's in the textbook, but it's available in a lot of different publications. It's just a USDA zone hardiness zone map is what they say. what they call it. Okay. It outlines 11 different zones. And until this morning, or when I was looking at it a few days ago, I looked at zone 9 as being Texas, southern part of Texas and Florida, and didn't pay any attention to zones 10 and 11. But zone 10 is the very southern tip of Florida, and zone 11 is down in the Keys. And there's also a zone 10 and 11 on the very southwestern portion of California. So those zones are modified by the aquatic surroundings of them. We talked a little bit the other day about the large bodies of water tempering temperature or adjusting temperature. And that's what happens there. The southern part of Florida is tempered by that warm water. So there's additional maps in here that talks about the expected frost-free days, last day of frost. Tom, what's average first frost for Southside? 20th of October, 25th?
I'm really not sure.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, I would think here ours on an average is somewhere around the 15th to 18th of October. And where Southwest is in rich lands, and I think theirs was generally either the 1st to the 5th of October. Wayne was always concerned about his late garden stuff, and it was a problem for him because he always was extending the season. And his stuff would get nipped. So, as we look at spring temperatures, when we were growing apples, we were always concerned about the late spring frosts because they can essentially take a crop away from the perennial crops like apple and peaches. They don't tolerate cold temperatures well when they're in bloom. Generally, our last spring frost at home would be around the 15th of April, and generally full bloom on the majority of the apples was about the 18th of April. So it's close. That's sort of what you're dealing with.
I'm pulling up a map I just looked up. I just put it on my screen. If I can get my mouse out of the way. It's sort of showing different zones, if you can tell by the colors, for those of you that aren't colorblind, and I apparently need to scroll up a little bit to see the other. No? Okay. But yeah, look like we're pretty much in the same zone that Martinsville and Henry County are in the October 21st through 31st date.
Okay.
Parts of us, when you get out to 85 and start getting out to Emporia and Keysville, might actually be getting into a little bit earlier, just like a little bit west of y'all. This could be getting into the 11th through 20th zone.
Yeah, that's the elevation that just a little west of us when you go up the mountain. That's where that is. Yeah, I've got a guy that, I talked to him yesterday that I've been getting pumpkins from, and he's still got a commercial acreage of tomatoes, and he's been hoping that it would stay warm for a little while longer because he's still harvesting tomatoes and green pepper. And neither one of those crops will tolerate any cold weather. So.
Yeah, let's see. I'm just looking. Henry County is going to be about here. Pennsylvania coming. Franklin County is here. Are you seeing where I'm drawing on it?
We don't see it at all.
Oh, okay.
It's all right.
Okay. Are y'all actually seeing the map in the first place?
No.
Oh, because it just occurred to me that I wasn't doing the screen share thing. So let me screen share it and everybody can see it. It's my first time. Okay. Now, seriously? Oh.
For real, man.
Yes. Now do you see it?
We do now.
Okay.
See it now. Yep.
Looking wrong, what I did is Henry County, Pennsylvania County, you're going to more or less be, not Pennsylvania County, but Franklin County are going to be there. We're out here where we are in Alberta, South Hill. We're going to be about there. Keysville is going to kind of, my eyeball 360. Keysville, y'all are going to kind of be there. So y'all actually, once I get to looking at the map, y'all are actually in the zone with October 11th through 20th. It's going to be y'all's first frost. For us, it's going to be 10 days later. So
Yeah,
you had
that's pretty much what I thought. And the blue area down where you've got the 81 symbol,
yeah.
purple, whatever you want to call it, that's in the area where Dwayne is there. And he's probably already had frost.
Yeah.
First to the, yeah. So, that's just a graphic example of what we're talking about with the differences in temperature and the factor that we were talking about that contributes to the length of the growing season. And in doing that, like Tyler was talking about with the soybeans, it will determine what you plant, when you plant, and certain things with variety selection because of, like I was talking about with the soybeans I saw Tuesday, they apparently were a shorter season variety. It was a shorter bean, and it had already dropped its leaves. Where with what Tyler was talking about, it was in the process of beginning to drop its leaves. In the spot that the gentleman's got behind my house, they look like they're still in a vigorous growth stage. It may be because the deer keep quacking the tops out of them. I don't know, but it's temperature determines what we plant when, and it also determines how long it will grow because of the length of this growing season that we're talking about. So, temperature also has an effect on how well plants grow. For example, there's research that shows that when the temperature gets above 86 degrees for the grapes that we're growing, photosynthesis essentially shuts down. It no longer, the plant goes into, for lack of a better way of describing it, a rest because the plant is not suited to that type of higher temperature. So the stomate's closed, it goes into a survival mode, and it doesn't continue to participate in photosynthesis. So, local, things make a huge difference. Now, I mentioned a while ago talking about the frost-free days for apples and peaches and so forth. Same thing for strawberries. All of these blooming type crops are subject to frost damage. And there are an assortment of ways that people try to protect their crops from frost damage. The norm for protection of a strawberry crop is to do sprinkle irrigation. And does it make sense to you that you could begin to apply water when the temperature reaches 35 degrees in the early morning in the spring when your strawberries are in bloom, in an effort to try to prevent them losses to frost? And as the temperature goes down, you'll have a layer of ice to develop on that strawberry. And does it make sense to you that layer of ice will protect it from freezing? Does that make sense at all?
Yes, sir.
All right. Why? Is your plan? There is a principle that's involved with this that was a little mystical to me when I was in school. And the major professor that I had was very good with his descriptions of what happens. And I've never been able to be as good with the explanation as he was. But what happens is you put water on there and it begins to freeze. The transfer from liquid water to frozen water gives up a very small amount of heat. And as long as you continue to apply water, regardless of that temperature, that heat is going to be given off. It's called the heat of fusion. In other words, when the fusion of water, it begins to build up ice, it gives off a little heat. And it will continue to maintain the temperature of that blossom at 32 degrees. It will not go any lower than that. And it will protect that strawberry blossom from damage. As long as you continue to apply water until all the ice melts and it goes away. Now, if you apply water till 8 o'clock in the morning and it's got a layer of ice on there and the temperature goes up to 40 outside, and you say, well, I've protected my strawberries tonight, I'll cut the water off. That doesn't work, because then it will freeze. Then the berries, potential flowers will freeze and be damaged. So that's a thing that's happened to a lot of folks that didn't know exactly what they were doing trying to protect a crop like that. We'll talk about that one some more next week. We're out of time. But the heat of fusion is something you'll need to know about.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you questions about it, but if we're just gonna talk about it more next week, then I'm good.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it a little more, because it's bad to stop right in the middle of that one. Remind me that's where we need to start next time, okay? In case I happen to get off on a tangent going somewhere else.
Yes, sir.
Find another weather balloon, okay? Y'all have a good weekend.
Oh, have a
You
good
do
weekend.
too. I'll
Okay.
see you Tuesday.
Bye.
Okay.
Pictures in the lab report.
Okay.
They got emailed to, yeah, you I guess sent them to Leanne and she sent them to me.
Oh.
Yes.
did you see it?
Cool.
Okay.
No,
And then